Today is day 79 since Nancy Guthrie vanished, so it has now been almost 80 days since this 84-year-old woman literally just disappeared from her home in Tucson, Arizona. Some new information in this episode I'm getting into. First of all, remember the 2 ransom notes that came early on that went to the TV stations in Arizona? Those are the notes that we believe Savannah Guthrie was referencing when she said that she thought 2 of the notes were real and legitimate. Well, there was a Bitcoin account, and we've got some new information about a transaction in that Bitcoin account. I've spoken to several retired FBI profilers who have come up with a profile of who they believe is responsible for the Nancy Guthrie abduction based on the information that they have. And Steve is the perfect person because he has had investigations where he's used profilers before. I also wanted to see what he thought about some of what they're telling me. I wanted to ask you some questions about some of this new information that's come out in the Nancy Guthrie investigation and some of the information that I've learned from some of the profilers that I talked to. And I wanted to see, as an agent, how you would put that into action actually with the investigation. But the first thing I wanted to ask you about is this new information coming from Brianna Whitney, who's a reporter with the CBS station in Phoenix. And that's one of the stations that received the first 2 ransom letters, the ones that we believe Savannah was referencing when she said that she thought 2 were real. And they're now divulging, the station, that when they looked back into the Bitcoin wallet, there was activity on February 10th, and there's been no activity since. So this would have been a couple of months ago, right when the letters first came out. And a small amount of money was put into the account along with a note that said, "We are ready to talk. Contact us," and then there was a link for how to reach out to them. And there's no way to know for sure that that was the FBI or Savannah Guthrie, but it seems like it would kind of make sense. What do you think it means that they put that note in there, but it seems there was no response?
Well, I don't think we know that there was no response. There was no response that was visible to us. But I think that what that is the FBI saying, if it was the FBI, which makes sense, it's them saying, "Hey, we're in a negotiation here. This is not something where we're going to play the game where you just dictate terms to us," because it's that whole thing. Well, this is your only mother. You want her back, so you better meet our terms. And they would say, "We're your only victims, so if you don't get money from us, you don't get a dime." So we're both in this, a zero-sum end game. I mean, this is big. And so there is wiggle room in negotiations. I can guarantee you, not every negotiation, but it really depends on how you do the negotiation. If you start, I know this sounds horrible, but it's like negotiating on a house or a car price, where if you come in and seem desperate, they will not budge. If they come in and seem truly, yes, we desperately want her back, but we're not going to set a precedent for future crimes, things like this, then you're forcing them into a negotiation. So I think what the FBI was telling them is, this is not you make a demand, we fulfill the demand. This is a negotiation, and this is going to be how it works.
Do you think that there was just that one entry from February 10th. Are you surprised they haven't tried again in terms of the FBI or the Guthries?
I'm not, but again, I don't know what they know. Maybe I would be surprised. And in the FBI, in the same case, there's going to be a case agent, there's going to be a supervisor, there's going to be the supervisor's boss, the assistant special agent in charge, and then it goes all the way to the president in this case. So there could be, it would be astounding to me if there wasn't disagreement within them within the team on what the best strategy is going forward. And I've never been in a situation where there wasn't. Somebody saying they sound crazy, just pay them. What have we got to lose? Well, we've got to lose everything on this case and the victim, and a precedent set for other cases. And so both sides come with strong arguments.
How much do you think they're consulting the family in the decision of whether to reach out again?
They're going to consult them before every significant move, and a lot of insignificant moves. But they won't be in, the Guthries won't be in the squad bay or the FBI conference room when they determine what their strategy recommendations are going to be. And certainly, I mean, think of it this way. It is not this relationship, but it has some similarities to a person who is on trial and they have an attorney. That attorney is an expert in the law, and they've seen this type of case so many times. But if the defendant wants to plead guilty, you can't talk him out of it. I mean, I'm sure you could try, but ultimately the decision is going to rest with the defendant. And in the FBI, it's very clear when you're going through training and when you start working these types of cases that you are working as an adjunct to the victims. You are trying to help them. At the same time, you are trying to capture the kidnapper. And so, it comes down to what's more important, capturing the kidnapper or getting the victim back. And that's where the rub comes in, usually. I used to argue that there's no difference if you get the victim, you get the kidnapper. If you get the kidnapper, you get the victim if they're still alive.
I'm just thinking, I mean, from the Guthrie's perspective, there doesn't seem to be much going on right now from what we know from our sources behind the scenes. Like, they're not making a ton of progress.
Right.
They don't seem to know who this person is who took Nancy or exactly what happened. And this may be the only real link that they have. If Savannah is saying we believe those two are real, I just don't know that I would be able to resist if that was my mom being like, let's get back in that Bitcoin account. Even now, you're up every night, screw it. Let's put more money in there and just see what happens.
Right. And I think some people would argue that puts you at a disadvantage, that if the person had Nancy alive and wanted to return her, they would be the one contacting the FBI. It doesn't. I don't think it's going to be. If the kidnappers were amenable to discussing it, they would have bit on the first one. And of course, it doesn't mean they didn't. See, the problem I have here is the kidnappers or the people demanding the ransom, we'll say that way, were negotiating in bad faith from day one. They would provide no proof of life. They didn't take Nancy's safety into consideration, according to, physical evidence at the scene. Everything they did was in bad faith. And so it's like negotiating with Iran. They can say that they're going to do something, but we sure don't trust them to do anything because they've never demonstrated anything, any bit of integrity or good faith in the investigation. One of the main issues that makes them seem like non-serious is that they wanted the negotiations basically public. They wanted to go through TMZ. They wanted to go through TV networks. If you wanted an intermediary to pass on stuff, you could choose people other than the media. They wanted this public.
It was an ordinary evening in Tucson, Arizona. Nancy Guthrie, 84 years old, was home. The house was quiet. Nothing seemed wrong. No signs of a break-in, no indication of a struggle, no alarm raised. And then, at some point between 1 hour and the next, she was simply gone, not wandered off, not checked into a hospital. Gone. Vanished from inside her own home in a way that left investigators standing in her bedroom asking a question they couldn't answer. How does an 84-year-old woman disappear without a single trace? That question launched one of the most unusual missing person investigations in recent memory. And 79 days later, it still didn't have an answer. Nancy Guthrie is the mother of Savannah Guthrie, the well-known anchor of NBC's Today Show. That detail matters, and we'll get to exactly why it matters. But first, understand who Nancy is on her own terms. She's a woman in her 80s, living alone in the desert Southwest. She had a routine. People knew her. She wasn't the kind of person who disappears quietly, and yet that's exactly what happened. In the immediate aftermath of her disappearance, law enforcement treated it the way they treat most missing person cases involving elderly individuals, methodically, carefully, with the assumption that a straightforward explanation was just around the corner. It wasn't. Days passed, then weeks. Then the first strange thing happened. 2 ransom letters arrived at local television stations in Arizona, not sent to the family, not delivered to law enforcement, sent to TV stations, publicly, visibly. In a way designed to be seen, the letters demanded money. They referenced Nancy. They created, almost overnight, a completely different type of investigation. This was no longer a missing person case. It was a potential kidnapping. And the family of one of America's most recognizable news anchors was now at the center of it. Savannah Guthrie, when she eventually addressed it, said something that changed how investigators were looking at everything. She said she believed 2 of the letters were real. Not all of them, 2 specifically, which means at least some of the communication being received was being viewed internally as legitimate. Think about what that means. Somewhere out there, someone had Nancy, or claimed to, and they had chosen to communicate not through back channels, not through private negotiation, but through the media, publicly, loudly, as if they wanted the whole country watching. That choice, the decision to go public, is the first thing that made investigators uncomfortable. Because it doesn't match how real kidnappings work. Real kidnappers want silence. They want control. They want as few eyes on the situation as possible. Going to the media is the opposite of that. And opposite behavior doesn't happen by accident. So 79 days after Nancy Guthrie walked out of the frame of her own life, the investigation had 2 tracks running simultaneously. One track was looking for her. The other was trying to understand what kind of person would do this and why. Because in cases like this, those 2 questions are never really separate. Finding the why almost always leads you to the who, and the who leads you eventually to her. This is where the story starts. Not with a dramatic scene or a smoking gun, with an absence, a quiet house in Tucson, an empty room, and a question that 79 days of investigation had not yet answered. Where is Nancy Guthrie? Like and subscribe to Unheard Confession for more stories that don't make the headlines but should. Of all the strange details in the Nancy Guthrie case, this one might be the strangest. Hidden inside a Bitcoin wallet, the same one tied to the ransom letters sent to Arizona TV stations, was a message. And the message wasn't from the kidnappers, it was to them. On February 10th, roughly 2 months into the investigation, a small transaction was made into the Bitcoin wallet. Alongside it, a single line of text: "We are ready to talk. Contact us." Then a link. No one officially confirmed who sent it, but based on how these cases operate, the working assumption is that it came from either the FBI or Nancy's family, which means at some point, someone on the investigation side decided to reach into the very channel the kidnappers had created and send a message back. Here's what's significant about that. The FBI doesn't make moves like this casually. When they reach out to a kidnapper, it's a calculated decision made at multiple levels of the organization: the case agent, the supervisor, the assistant special agent in charge, and sometimes higher. There are people in that chain who will argue for patience and people who will argue for action. Both sides have strong cases, but when they decide to move, they move for a reason. The message itself, "We are ready to talk," is not a concession. It's a negotiating posture. It's the FBI saying, "We're not going to sit here and let you dictate terms. If you want money, you have to earn it through conversation." Because the moment investigators respond to a demand without negotiation, they set a precedent. Not just for this case, but for every case that follows. A retired FBI agent put it plainly, "This isn't a situation where you look desperate. The second you look desperate, you lose." The kidnappers believe they hold all the leverage because you want the victim back. But the FBI flips that. You hold all the leverage because we're your only source of payment. No deal, no money. So now we negotiate. What happened after that message was sent is what troubles investigators most. Nothing. No reply, no counteroffer, no proof of life, no follow-up of any kind, just silence. And silence in a kidnapping negotiation is never neutral. It means something. One possibility. The kidnappers received the message and decided they didn't want to negotiate on those terms. They wanted compliance, not conversation, and when they didn't get it, they disengaged. Another possibility. Whoever was behind the ransom letters was never truly interested in negotiating at all. The letters, the Bitcoin wallet, the public communication, all of it was theater. A performance designed to look like a kidnapping without actually functioning like one. There's a third possibility, and it's the most uncomfortable one. The people who sent those letters may no longer have had Nancy by the time that message arrived. What investigators can say with certainty is this: the communication structure of this ransom scenario does not match the behavior of people who are serious about getting paid. Real kidnappers don't go quiet when the other side shows willingness to talk. They push harder. They apply pressure. They remind you of what's at stake. None of that happened here. Instead, there's a Bitcoin wallet that received one message and went silent. A channel opened and never used again. And a family left sitting in that silence, wondering every single night if reaching back in, sending another message, putting more money in the account would change anything. That tension between strategy and desperation, between what the FBI recommends and what a daughter's heart demands, is where this case has lived for months. And it's still unresolved. Like and subscribe to Unheard Confession. New episodes every week on cases that demand answers. When a case stalls, when the leads dry up and the trail goes quiet, investigators bring in a different kind of expert. Not someone who chases evidence. Someone who studies behavior. Profilers. People who have spent careers reading the patterns left behind by the worst kinds of crimes and learning what those patterns say about the person who committed them. In the Nancy Guthrie case, multiple retired FBI profilers were consulted. And the picture they started to build was not the one most people expected. Start with the statistics. 92% of women who are murdered are killed by someone they know. Not a stranger. Someone familiar. Someone who had access to their life, their home, their routine. In Nancy's case, investigators hadn't confirmed a death officially. She was still a missing person. But cases like this don't exist outside of statistical patterns, and that number casts a long shadow. If it applies here, then whoever took Nancy didn't select her at random. They didn't drive through Tucson and pick a house. They knew where she lived. They understood her routine. They felt confident enough in that knowledge to enter her home and remove her without immediate resistance. That level of confidence doesn't come from chance. It comes from familiarity. But here's where the profile takes an unexpected turn. When profilers looked at the execution of the crime, the boldness of it, the lack of hesitation, the decision to go public with the ransom, one word kept surfacing: unafraid. Not reckless, not panicked, unafraid. That word matters because it tells you something about what the person believed going in. They believed they would not get caught, and that belief doesn't appear from nowhere. It comes from either experience, meaning they've done something like this before, or from obsession. A fixation so intense that consequences stop registering as a deterrent. Obsession as a motive changes the entire shape of the investigation, because obsession is personal. It's emotional. And in cases where a public figure is involved, that emotion often has a very specific source. Savannah Guthrie is one of the most recognizable faces in American television. Millions of people watch her every morning. And within that audience, the overwhelming majority are ordinary viewers who change the channel and move on. But a small number don't. A small number pay closer attention. They form connections in their minds, one-sided connections that feel real to them even though they don't exist in reality. They catalog what they see. They interpret tone. They assign meaning to comments and segments that the broadcaster never intended. And sometimes, over time, that attention curdles into something darker. Investigators began asking a different question, not just who had access to Nancy, but who had an emotional connection to Savannah, who had tried to reach her, who had sent messages or letters that stood out for the wrong reasons, who had expressed resentment, because if Nancy wasn't the primary target, if she was the method rather than the goal, then her disappearance wasn't about her at all. It was about making a statement to someone else. Someone who would feel it. Someone who would be forced to see it, to respond to it publicly, to live inside it. That reframing shifts everything. It means the ransom letters sent to TV stations weren't a mistake. They were a delivery mechanism, a way to guarantee that the right person saw the message, a way to reach Savannah Guthrie in the most public, most painful way imaginable. If that theory holds, then this wasn't a kidnapping that failed. It was a message that was delivered exactly as intended. And the silence that followed wasn't abandonment. It was completion. That possibility is the one investigators cannot dismiss. And it's the one that makes this case feel different from anything else currently open in Arizona. Like and subscribe to Unheard Confession. If this case matters to you, sharing it helps. Weeks the investigation lived entirely in the world of theory. Behavior patterns, statistical profiles, motive analysis, all of it valuable, none of it conclusive, because theories, no matter how well constructed, are not evidence. And without evidence, a case can drift indefinitely, expanding outward into possibilities without ever landing on a truth. That's where investigators were, until they found something physical. It came from Nancy's bedroom, the place where she was last known to be. The room where, at some point, something happened that changed everything. Investigators had gone back through it methodically, the bed, the sheets, every surface, every corner. Because if someone had been in that room who wasn't supposed to be there, they didn't leave empty-handed. Human beings shed constantly. Hair, skin cells, microscopic material that follows us everywhere, into every space we enter, whether we intend to leave it or not. What they found was a single strand of hair. On its own, that might not sound like much. But in a case that had produced almost no physical evidence, a single strand is everything. Initial testing was run, standard methods, and the results were limited, not useless, but incomplete. The reason matters here. Hair DNA is most useful when the follicle, the root, is attached. That's where the richest genetic material sits. Without it, you can establish certain characteristics, but not always a definitive identity. For years, that's where cases like this would stall. A promising piece of evidence that couldn't be pushed far enough. But investigators didn't stop there. They sent the strand to Quantico, to the FBI's own laboratory, one of the most sophisticated forensic facilities in the world. And that decision signals something specific. When evidence goes to Quantico, it means the team believes there's more to extract. It means they're prepared to use methods that standard labs don't have access to. Newer techniques, more precise tools, testing that didn't exist in any meaningful form just a few years ago. One of those methods is forensic genealogy. If standard DNA comparison doesn't produce a direct hit, meaning the person isn't already in a database, investigators can work backward through partial matches, build family trees, trace identity through relatives, follow genetic threads until they converge on a name. It's slower, it's complex. But when it works, it doesn't just give you a suspect. It gives you context, relationships, a map of how that person connects to the victim. In Nancy's case, that context could be everything. Because the theories built around this crime aren't random, they point towards someone specific, someone with a connection either to Nancy directly or to Savannah. If that strand belongs to a person who fits that description, then everything shifts from speculation into something that can be tested, challenged, and ultimately proven. But there are limits. Evidence doesn't always cooperate. Hair can be transferred, attached to clothing, moved from one location to another without the original person ever being present in the new space. Even a confirmed DNA match requires interpretation. Presence in the bedroom doesn't automatically equal responsibility for the crime. That's a distinction investigators hold carefully, because the last thing a case this sensitive needs is a match that creates more confusion than clarity. What the strand does, even before results come back, is change the energy of the investigation. For the first time, there's a physical piece of the puzzle, something real, something that doesn't depend on behavioral analysis or statistical probability. Something that either connects or doesn't. And if it connects, the next step is immediate. Find the person, understand the link, close the distance between theory and fact. The lab is working. The results aren't public yet, but in a case that has produced almost nothing concrete in nearly 80 days, one strand recovered from one room in Tucson might be the piece that breaks this open. Like and subscribe to Unheard Confession. Stay with us, here is where everything comes together. By now you've seen how this case was built. The disappearance, the ransom letters that shouldn't have been public, the Bitcoin message that went unanswered, the profile of someone unafraid, deliberate, and possibly motivated by something far more personal than money. The single strand sent to Quantico in the hope that science can find what 79 days of investigation couldn't. But there's one thread that hasn't been pulled yet. The silence. Not the silence from the kidnappers after the FBI made contact, that's been discussed. This is a different silence, a broader one. The silence of someone who acted, created enormous public attention, opened channels of communication, and then simply stopped. No escalation, no follow-up demands, no return to the Bitcoin wallet, no proof of life. Nothing. That kind of silence is not typical. It's not what you see in kidnappings where the goal is money. Those cases escalate. Demands get louder. Timelines get shorter. Pressure builds because pressure is the only tool available to someone who needs you to act. But none of that happened here. And the most credible explanation for why it didn't is also the most difficult one to sit with. Whatever needed to happen had already happened. When investigators stop applying pressure, it's almost always because the immediate objective no longer requires it. If the goal was to inflict pain on a specific person, to force a public figure into a public crisis, to make them feel the weight of helplessness in front of an audience of millions, that goal was accomplished the moment the story broke nationally. The ransom letters reached the TV stations. The story spread. Savannah Guthrie had to address it publicly. The family was exposed, vulnerable, and grieving in real time. If that was the point, it worked. And once it worked, there was nothing left to do. That framing puts every other detail in a different light. The decision to use TV stations instead of private channels wasn't sloppy, it was strategic. The lack of proof of life wasn't an oversight, it was irrelevant to the actual objective. The one message in the Bitcoin wallet wasn't a negotiating position, it was a prop. Part of the set design of a crime built to look like a kidnapping without functioning like one. And if this is true, then the person who did this isn't waiting for a response. They're not watching the wallet. They're not monitoring whether the FBI is getting closer. They've already gotten what they came for. That's the hardest version of this story to hold, because it doesn't leave room for a rescue. It doesn't leave space for Nancy to come home. It suggests that from the moment she disappeared, the outcome was already determined. Investigators aren't ready to accept that. Not publicly, not operationally. They're still working the evidence, still running the DNA, still following behavioral threads and looking for the moment where somebody talked to somebody who said something they shouldn't have. Because cases like this don't always close through a single dramatic break. Sometimes they close through accumulation, one small detail connecting to another, a name appearing in the wrong place at the wrong time, a pattern becoming undeniable. What the public knows now is this. Nancy Guthrie has been missing for nearly 80 days. A hair strand is being tested at one of the most advanced forensic labs in the country. The ransom communication has gone cold. And behind the scenes, An investigation is still running, quieter now, more focused, looking for the one thing that converts theory into certainty. The silence in this case isn't the silence of a cold trail. It's the silence of something that has already concluded. Something that started with an ordinary evening in Tucson and ended in a way that no one who knew Nancy Guthrie could have imagined. We don't have her back yet. We don't have answers yet. But the investigation is not over. And when the DNA results come back, when that strand speaks, this case will either crack open or go deeper. Either way, the story isn't finished. Nancy Guthrie deserves answers. Her family deserves answers. And so does anyone who believes that an 84-year-old woman vanishing from her own home should not be something the world simply moves past. This is unheard confession. We don't move past these stories. We stay until there's an answer. Like and subscribe to Unheard Confession. Share this episode. Because sometimes the only thing that keeps a case alive is the number of people who refuse to let it go quiet.